Well, it will be a small group. We don't have to have any sort of quorum or anything, so that's good. Um, but I appreciate y'all being here. I know some of you were at the work session on Tuesday, so you're doing a lot of volunteer work this week, so I really appreciate it. But hopefully, this meeting, I have it scheduled for 2 hours, but we're not going to need that much time at all. So it's just going to be a very beginning kind of, I've already prefaced you on some of this work that we're doing, but I'll go into a little bit more detail. And then Heather is also here from our consultant team on the project. And so she'll also be able to answer any questions if need be that come up as well. But my goal for this meeting is one, to start with introductions, kind of get everyone familiar, mostly so that you can meet Heather. I think most of you know each other already. But then I'll do a brief kind of overview of the project. It might be a repeat for some of you, but for others, it may also be new about what this project is. And then, so a little bit of detail on the background of this project, what you can expect for this project. And then we'll talk more, have just kind of a free discussion kind of about multifamily developments in Newberg, as that's kind of the focus of this project. So let me start off with introductions. I'll go first, and then Heather, you can go on, and then the advisory committee, they're also planning commission members, can go after that. But if you don't know me, most of you do, I'm Mary. I'm the housing planner with the city of Newberg, and I'm the project manager for this project.
Hi, everyone. I'm Heather Austin. I work for 3J Consulting. We as a firm have done a lot of housing code work in the last few years. I personally have worked in Newberg. I worked on your HB 2001 project. So I've gotten a chance to dig into your codes, your comprehensive plan, and your plan districts, and work with your staff on those. So I'm looking forward to taking this next step on multifamily housing and hearing, really, I think my goal for tonight is to hear your thoughts and concerns related to multifamily housing. And then it'll be my job over the next couple of months to go through the existing codes and plans and see where we can recommend some changes based on, trends in the state, what people are needing in their developments, and also what you as a community are looking for. So thank you so much for having me this evening.
Great. And then I'll just go from top left that I see on my screen. So Linda, go ahead.
Hi, I'm Linda Newton-Curtis, and I've lived in Newberg now for 30 years. I think I came here in 91. So really interested to hear about this plan and to understand what needs to be done and think about what would be best for Newberg.
Great, thanks. Jeffrey.
Hi, and it can be just Jeff.
Jeff.
And yeah, been on the planning commission a bit. As far as time in town, what are we, about a little over 15 years, which is by far the longest I'd ever lived in one place. by about a multiple of 4 or so. And yeah, like Linda was saying, interested to see what we're looking at and what we can do to help come up with good solutions for the community.
Great. All right, Connor.
Hi, Commissioner Connor Hansen. I'm new to the Planning Commission as of this last year. I've lived in Newberg for about 20-ish years, pretty much born and raised here. But yeah, I concur with my fellow commissioners, just eager to learn and help out the community.
Great, thanks. Sharon.
Hi there. I actually moved out here in 2013, but I've always driven through Newberg on my way to McMinnville to see my grandparents, even as a child. So I've watched its growth, and I have to say, I love the small town feel of Newberg. I loved it when I moved out here. I'm really afraid of losing that. So that really is my concern. And oh my goodness, parking and traffic. So those are my huge ones. I had a friend who rented a townhome in Sherwood, and it was just unbelievable. The parking and the no parking on the streets and parking all around the perimeter. It's something that I understand from Doug that according to the state, you only have to have one parking place in front of a unit. But you know that the way that economy is, more than just one person needs a vehicle in a family anymore. So anyway, that's it. And that's why I'm really anxious to hear what you guys have in mind and the perimeters that you do your studies with. Thank you.
Great, thanks. Jason, finally you.
Hi, I'm Jason Dale. I've been in Newberg all my life. My family runs Sportsman Airpark, the airport here in town. So I'm third generation owner and manager of that. So that's since 1946. My grandmother's from Dayton. And so you could say we go back in the community a while. Been on planning commission since 2012. And I believe that as someone who's been here such a long time and seen how things have changed, that someone like that needs to be in on having a stake in making sure that things keep changing for the better and not the worse. And because if somebody takes their hand off and doesn't look at what's going on, you have Newberg grow like it did in the 90s. And I don't agree with how that happened, because there's so many people against anything, and something's going to happen. You just have to make sure it's not going to be the wrong thing. That's why I'm here to do what I do, and that's why I'm here, and that's why I want to keep doing and keep seeing what's happening, be a part of the community in this fashion by volunteering. Thank you.
Great, thanks. Well, you'll have a lot to say in this as the advisory committee, not just planning commissioners, but since the advisory committee will be meeting with you all more closely about this. And I'll talk about this a little bit later, but part of this will be actual code amendments around multifamily development. So you'll have quite a bit of say and input, which will be, I think, something that you all are interested in. So let me start by sharing my screen here. And let's see. Okay. All right. Can you all see that? Great. Okay. Let me. There we go. Okay. So, like I said, this is the first advisory committee meeting for the multifamily code audit and amendments project. Like I said, we'll have a couple more of these meetings with you all, but I will talk a little bit further about what this project is, especially for some of the newer commissioners, and then kind of the understanding and expectations for this project as well. And of course, Heather, you are more than welcome to provide or chime in if there's anything also that I'm missing or I need to add on to. So,
and can I just add something? I'm sorry, Mary.
No, perfectly fine.
I was finding it difficult to hear. I think it's Heather, the consultant, and I'm wondering if she could turn up her microphone or do something to help with that if she does.
Is this better if I don't use my headphones?
Yeah.
Okay, I'll just skip the headphones.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Perfect. Okay. And we'll have questions and things towards as we go, but I'm also open to if like something comes up, you're like, I have a question on that, feel free to ask. So overview of the project here. It sort of started with House Bill 2001, the infamous House Bill that everyone talks about nowadays, which basically kind of overhauled housing in the state of Oregon. And one of the things that was part of House Bill 2001 was they stated that any needed housing should have or is required to have clear and objective standards. And I'll explain what clear and objective standards are a little bit later. But also the state defines needed housing as basically any kind of housing. So it's not like needed housing is affordable housing, subsidized housing, that sort of thing. It's literally any type of housing. So we've been doing a lot of this work already. Single family housing already meets this criteria. All of the work that you all did for middle housing, so that's duplexes, triplexes, quads, townhomes, cottage clusters, they also are meeting this requirement now. Same with accessory dwelling units. And then the last thing that we need to do for this is multifamily housing. And so multifamily housing is going to be any housing that has 5 or more units on one property. So typically it's apartment buildings is your most common form of multifamily housing. So myself and Doug, the community development director here, applied for a technical assistance grant from the Department of Land Conservation and Development, DLCD. And so we were awarded money to help fund us do this work, which is why we have Heather here. So that's very helpful for us because Heather's going to do a lot of the grunt work on the code audit and the amendment language, as well as Scott. He's not here, but he's part of the team. And so that's kind of the background of this project, kind of where this came from, why we're doing it. And again, it's kind of the last thing that we have to do in terms of meeting this clear and objective standard for from the state for House Bill 2001. Okay, so project goals and anticipated outcomes. It's sort of going to be in 2 phases. The first phase will be an audit of our development code as well as our comprehensive plan. And this will mean that we're going to see where is it that we aren't meeting the clear and objective standards, where are we meeting them? Are there areas where we can add in more clear and objective standards? Are there places that we need to kind of edit a little bit further so it's more clear, that sort of thing. So that's the first phase. And then the second phase will be actual code amendments. So actually rewriting some of the code language in the development code and also the comprehensive plan so that it meets this requirement of clear and objective standards for multifamily development. And so obviously the outcome is going to be an updated development code and comprehensive plan that is going to be recommended by Planning Commission, you all, and then ultimately adopted by City Council. So that's sort of the process that this goes through. And it'll sort of happen in those 2 phases that I've mentioned. So I've mentioned this word a lot, clear and objective. And I made a little slide so it could be a bit easier to understand if you don't know what that means. But clear and objective language is language that is basically almost like a check mark that you can say, oh, I've met that or I haven't. It's not fluffy language. It's usually very numerical. It's either you meet it or you don't. And so the point of why the state wants all needed housing or any housing to have clear and objective language is that it creates a clear path for people to build housing so that they know that they will meet all of the standards and that their project will be able to go through and kind of be able to be built in a quicker, faster way than if we had something that was more discretionary. And so here's kind of the pathway that a lot of cities do it is they'll have a clear and objective path, and then they'll have a discretionary path. And what that means is, say a developer comes in and they want to build a 20-unit apartment complex. They can either go down the clear and objective path, which usually will be an easier path to meet, but it's going to be more strict on things that they have to do. And then the discretionary path will be kind of more fluffy language. Usually it's a higher review level, so usually it would come to Planning Commission. And it's they want to go above and beyond, or they want to go beyond what those clear and objective standards are, but they have to prove that they meet the intent of those discretionary standards to you all at Planning Commission, right? So they have to prove, because I'm not doing this clear and objective way, I'm still meeting the objectives for the code by telling you how I'm doing that through the discretionary language. So here's an example that I put together for you all. So clear and objective would be an example, maximum building height of 45 feet, right? That's very easy to understand. Either you meet it or you don't. Use horizontal siding for 50% of the building facades facing public streets. That's also a design requirement that you could have that's clear and objective. Again, it's either you meet it or you don't. 20% of the front facade of the buildings must have windows, right? Again, it's usually very numerical, easy to know that your proposal will meet those standards. And therefore, we don't require as much review to happen because we've already done basically the review by coming up with these code standards. And so that's what we'll be doing as part of this project, is we'll actually be making sure that these clear and objective code standards are what is best for the Newberg community. It meets the requirements from the state of being clear and objective, and that it'll help facilitate easier time for people to build multifamily housing in Newberg, right? So a discretionary standard would be something along the lines of, and actually I literally took this from our code. So this is a sentence in our code already. Respect the scale and patterns of nearby buildings by reflecting the architectural style, building details, materials, and scale of existing buildings. Now that could mean so many different things, right? So that's why we call it discretionary. And so if a developer decided to go through a discretionary path where we would have language like this already written, they would have to tell to you, the Planning Commission, or maybe even Doug, the Community Development Director, whoever is the approval person or entity, that they're meeting this criteria and here's how they're doing it. But it could be something that's different than what's in our clear and objective standards. It's usually people that want to go beyond what the clear and objective standards are. And so they're okay with going through more review. They're okay with having more of a unknown if the project will even be approved or not. And that's kind of why there's discretionary paths, right? So it has an option for people that want to do something different than what's in their clear and objective standards.
Can I ask a question again, Miriam?
Yes.
Sorry.
No, that's
so
fine.
What you're saying is these people could come and say, okay, well, we actually want to build something that's 55 feet tall with just 30%, but here's how we meet the discretionary language that you've put together.
Right. Yeah. So we would have limits too. For example, you know, the zone would have a limit on the maximum height in general. So it's not like the discretionary path would let people do whatever they wanted to do. But if they're saying, if for some reason the discretionary path is usually more related to kind of design elements, things that they want to kind of go beyond, like, for example, they're wanting to do something design-wise that's a little bit different. And so they want to only have 15% of their front facade have windows. Then they would need to show through the discretionary path why only having 15% is still going to meet the standards of respecting architectural styles, building details, of, you know, scale of existing buildings. So that's kind of how it works. But we'll be able to set limits too. So it's not like we can have, you know, say, oh yeah, you can absolutely still go through the discretionary path if you're only going to provide, you know, 10%. We can set those limits too, so that, you know, we can make sure that it's clear what we're expecting from people when they apply for, to propose a development. Any other questions on this? Okay. So it'll be easier once we kind of start doing more of this work to understand it. But again, our main goal is really to make sure that we are creating, and so we do already have existing clear and objective standards too, but we need to make sure that there's always going to be a clear and objective pathway for somebody when they are applying. So you all, as the Citizen Advisory Committee, is going to have a lot of input on this process. Again, it'll be reviewing kind of the code audit that Heather and 3J will do, as well as providing feedback, making sure that we're heading in the right direction, making sure that we're not missing anything. And then on the second part, the code amendments, you'll be helping us kind of review and provide feedback on amendments that we propose to the development code. And then, of course, ultimately, you'll be holding public hearings and making a recommendation to City Council, who will eventually adopt this proposal as well. So it's quite vetted through you all. And I'll also show that we'll be doing outreach as well beyond you all. But those are kind of the main reasons why we have you here. Is one, you review a lot of proposals in general. You understand the code maybe probably the best out of all of the committees in the city. And so it's helpful to have people that are sort of familiar to kind of give more of the feedback on details of things like this. And so that's why we have you all as the advisory committee. And so in terms of the timeline and kind of what we're planning on doing, the red boxes here show all of the meetings for you all. So the dates for the November and January aren't fully set yet, but we expect to meet with you all in a couple of different phases. So during tax 2, where we're doing the analysis and code audit, we'll come back to you in August. Heather will probably have some code audit materials for you all to review and give feedback on. And then in task 3, when we do the code amendments, you all will kind of be there after some outreach that we do with the community. So we'll be doing outreach, especially to developers, architects, people that actually build multifamily housing in Newberg, making sure that we're doing things that are going to be helpful for them as well. But also we have an open house for the general community as well. So we want to make sure we're getting feedback from most people in the community, but we definitely want to make sure that we're, hearing also from the actual developers as well. So we have 2 set interviews of focus groups with developers, and then we have that open house, and then we'll come back to you all. All of the feedback that we've heard from everyone will kind of dictate what those code amendments will look like. You all provide feedback, and then you'll provide even more feedback on any sort of revisions that we make. So that's where this last meeting is here. And then we're hoping by February of March next year, we'll be doing the public hearings and then the eventual adoption as well. So that's kind of the real basic timeline for this proposal that we have. So it's about a 1.5 year long project in general.
So
Okay.
Mary,
Yes.
you're the one basically bird dogging this particular evolution?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I'll be here. I'm the project manager. I'm sort of helping facilitate everything all together, helping organize all of the focus groups, interviews, community meetings, that sort of thing. And then obviously helping Heather and 3J on their work as well. Yeah. Any other questions?
Not so much a question, Mary, but
Yes.
that was a great overview of everything that's going on in the process that we're embarking on here. And I know that most of you have been on the Planning Commission and have been through a bunch of this housing work in the recent years. But just a reminder that as we go through, the lens that we're looking through is how do we make sure that we're reducing or possibly removing barriers to creating good housing that people are going to want to live in, and that's going to be an asset to our community. So, we'll definitely get into issues of parking and traffic and things like that. But at the end of the day, we want to make sure that whatever housing we're permitting is meeting like that small town feel that Sharon talked about, or what makes Newberg special. We'll try really hard to keep that in mind as we go through and think about these these pathways if we go with a 2-pathway system. But want to make sure that, excuse me, not sure why I have a frog in my throat, but that we're keeping that in mind, that, you know, the focus really is in reducing the barriers to getting more housing built, because the state has made it the mandate that that is our focus right now. 10 years ago, our focus was building the economy, and it still is, of course, but it was like, you know, employment land at all costs. And now we're on housing. So we're gonna, you know, work together to do the best we can and keep in mind the values that make Newberg special. So I guess that's all I would add there.
Yeah, no, that was a great addition, Heather. And it's a good reminder just to make sure that, yeah, so what we're doing is like you're vetting all of this work to make sure that it's going to be best for the Newberg community. As people that live there, you all know Newberg really well. So, you know, we have to meet these clear and objective standards. We want to be able to create housing that's going to be affordable and that's going to be helpful for all income levels in Newberg. And part of that strategy is building multifamily housing. So, you know, in terms of just like an overall strategy, we want to make sure that we're providing all different types of housing in Newberg, because there's different income levels in Newberg and different needs. Not everyone, you know, wants to live in an apartment, but also not everyone wants to live in a single family home. So we're trying to kind of create ways that we can provide all of that, but in a way that meets the Newberg community and follows kind of the goals that you all want to see the city kind of become in the future.
Could I interject something? When I was studying architecture, we did a summer trip to Barcelona to study the open spaces. Barcelona is extremely dense population, but they have all these wonderful parks that people go to and can be in. Now, I just, you know, along with me saying I want the small town feel, but I want actually more than that. I think that there's not only, I keep kind of feeling like, no, we're got to get as many builders in and as many projects in here as possible. Is maybe people would rather live here if it was better done, if there was actually more of a feel of a town rather than just a bedroom community, a super dense bedroom community, and everybody's on the highway and back to Portland or something. Sorry, but I just feel like in planning, when I was also studying architecture, I did urban design, and some of the things that were so important were how people get to and from places. How do you actually go in the town? So beyond just, I absolutely see where we have people that work in shops and they need to be able to afford to have a place to live. But I think ultimately there should be an overview plan, and I haven't seen one.
And can I just leapfrog off of what Sharon said? I think, you know, I was so pleased that you mentioned this idea of open spaces. I wasn't necessarily thinking of open spaces so much as green spaces, but definitely open spaces.
Right.
It's so important for people's mental health and well-being, and for children and
Right.
their development. The other thing, and I think that's so important, the other thing that I think that we need to consider, and I've only been on the planning commission, I've only been to one meeting so far, so I don't know very much at all. But having said that, one of the things that I think it's great to have these codes, but I would love to be able to codify aesthetics, because one of my pet peeves, as I said, I've lived here for 30 years, and I really do think of Newberg and Oregon as my home. And we've got some really ugly new buildings. They're just ugly. And I think we need to do better. So I don't know how that can be codified, but I just wanted to leapfrog off what Sharon said about open spaces and their importance.
Can I just ask a clarifying question then, Sharon and Linda? When you think of open spaces and green spaces, when you think of denser multifamily type housing, do you picture public open spaces or do you picture private open, or is it a combination of both?
I suppose I'm picturing public open space where people from those communities can walk across the street. There might be a nice, okay, take the Portland South and Southwest and Northwest park blocks. It's a block all through the city, and the people that live in the dense apartments can go out at night and be in that park. And that's kind of what, I mean, it's nice if they have a little patio of their own, and it's especially nice if there's off-street parking. But mostly it's urban spaces.
And I agree with that. When I think about it, I think, yes, balconies are wonderful, but, and they're good, but I always think of families. And families with young children need to be able to play. They need to be able to be outside. They need to be able to kick balls around, throw balls around, and they need to be able to do it safely. You know, you see so many of these apartment buildings that have the building and a car park, and that's it. And to me, I think that's untenable.
We do have quite a few public parks, and they're scattered out everywhere. So I don't know if you guys are referring, like, do we need more green space?
I think we do.
The
Yeah,
public
If we're building more, then we need more. Yeah.
exactly. And I mean, when you
So
think
what
of
sort
young
of
children,
density-
you
what
can't
sort
just
of
send them out the
density
door to, you know, some green space that's, oh, I don't know, a mile down the road. You need to have, if there, I just think of.
So what sort of density goal of green space are you looking for here? Because I mean, if everybody's got, you know, something in their front yard, that's kind of ridiculous.
I don't know what you mean by that.
Like it just sounds like you want green space everywhere. Like every other block is green space.
No.
We already have tons of green space.
No,
No.
but we're also developing mass quantities of what used to be open land, farmland, or whatever. And so it's like the waterfront, the riverfront development. You've got a lot of pathways, you've got all the area under the overpass, you know, that's been pretty well thought out as far as that. But we're not talking, I'm not, right here where I live, I've got 2 different parks within walking distance. So as they're developing and doing a much denser population further on and around, I think that they need to have a public area
I agree.
that people can go be in, a nature park or a game park, or again, I go back to Barcelona. I mean, men were playing bocce ball, women were sitting around talking and knitting or playing chess or whatever. It's groups and it's community involvement, which is so nice.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%, Sharon.
If I may put something in, I believe there is something already in the code about adding park space to new developments. For instance, when not Shelley Park, but the one that went into the west of that, I'm spacing the name of it, but it's just north of Crater, you know, or northwest of that along Chehalem Drive. When that went in, and there was some apartment buildings as part of like a 2 or 3 acre development. I forget which. I think Jeff can back me up on this, but as part of that was dedicated essentially open / park space. Now, I don't think it went to Park and Rec, but it's still, as part of the development,
It's just,
and developers can take advantage of that as far as their open space requirements, and then they can put that for the cumulative requirements of the development into that main space there, so it doesn't have to be all spread out. And so there's provisions for that in the code already, and I think that happens pretty well. I mean, obviously some exceptions, but that's already there. The thing we have to watch out for is that when we talk about open space, when we talk about increasing density, those are hard contradictory goals.
no,
And
they're
speed.
perfect together. If you're going to have one, you should have the other.
Well, right, but you can't, if you're increasing the density, that means you have to take the space from somewhere to do that. And so,
do you want to live in that, Jason?
well, again, the livability and density are two
No,
not
that's
necessarily
what,
contradictory things.
it can't be. That's what I'm talking about. The whole urban planning. Is that what you want? Or do you want a space? Do you want a city that's livable?
Well, I would like a city that's livable, but that means a city that's not very dense to me.
No,
So,
I agree.
no, or maybe it gets bigger. Or maybe it spreads out further. Maybe it's livable.
well, we can't do
and
that.
bigger.
We've been trying to expand urban growth boundary, and we can't do that. You can either grow out or you can grow up.
Well,
Height wise,
Okay.
but short of that, you don't get any more density. And so I mean, I agree with you. I agree with your concepts of livability being priority, but again, you're talking about contradictory things, and I don't like it very much, but we're being told from Salem that this is what we have to do, and so meaning density.
Okay. Could I
Let
ask
me-
one more? Can I make one more comment that maybe hasn't got a lot to do with what we're talking about? And that is the two subdivisions that we just were looking at up by the hospital, across the street from the hospital. And the newest one and Benjamin Road and all of that, and putting
Sure,
that
sure.
that county road in through a housing development that's going to have 200 cars in the morning trying to get out of that one traffic light and onto the highway. That's what I'm talking about. That would be hell. I can't even imagine why anyone would say that's a good plan.
Do you have another plan?
With regards to
Well,
that,
maybe
I
they
think
should- I mean, they said, oh, we can't put a traffic light at Benjamin Road. That's $750,000. Well, yeah, but
Well-
maybe it would move traffic.
Well, again,
I
that
would
means
think it
none of
might
that
be
housing gets built.
counterproductive if I would say, to add another traffic light, that I don't think that 200 load on that intersection is enough to warrant another light and then have another stop, because then you get those back-to-backs build up. So yeah, there can be unintended consequences, but I think that the upstream traffic on Benjamin Road isn't going to be enough to overload that intersection there. And I just want to add
Okay,
something too,
well-
as far as the density and the green space. Like Jason was talking, it is in the code, but it wouldn't hurt to look at that code and just make sure we're looking at the best things about livability, because park space, there's not a lot of space for new parks. So as more people come in, and the example you're talking about, Crestwood Crossing down there, with the small park, I live on the side of that, the developed side, and it's usually not too crowded, and it'll probably be a lot more crowded when that development gets full. So it's always good to consider, but you do have the options of land is at a premium and getting more so. So the concept of open space is good, and maybe it would be nice. It's hard to retrofit like pedestrian only roads and stuff like that, like Barcelona and like a lot of the European cities have, because our development for so many decades has been car focused. But it's worth looking at what's in the code there now and seeing that, we make sure that we push towards livability while still, meeting the density requirements.
Okay, I'm glad you talked about pedestrian only, because at some point I'd like to put forth an idea with this whole plan in the city. Anyway.
Yeah, I
I'll be
would
quiet
too.
now and listen.
Oh, I would too. That's something we'll need to address outside of this committee though. But I'd be with you on looking into that.
Okay, good.
On the idea of the open space related to multifamily housing, we did go into detail on this issue in Salem. It was probably 5 years ago. We were looking at their multifamily housing, and we finally came to a point where we required on-site open space if there was not a public park within a certain distance. And I mean, I'm trying to pull back 5 years ago, but I think it was a 1/4 mile. And I think it could have even been a 1/2 mile. And then if you were within a 1/4 mile, your size of open space on your site could reduce. So there are ways we can look at that to make sure you either have access to a decent sized public space, or if you're too far away, that you're providing it on site as well. So we'll keep that in mind.
Awesome. Thank you.
Sure.
Yeah. So, we can keep talking. I think we're already going through this, which is great. I just was trying to come up with questions to kind of help focus the discussion, but what we've been doing so far is great. And, so as Heather mentioned, these are good things that we're hearing so that we know, okay, keep our ears peeled for, okay, we're wanting to make sure that we're thinking about open space when we're looking at the code amendments, or where do we already, because I'm pretty positive we do require some amount of open space, whether it's through balconies or play area or something. They might already require that in our multifamily code right now, but is it meeting what we want it to meet, right? So we'll be doing those exercises of making sure that we're, looking for things that are with new developments, are they meeting or addressing some of the issues that we are wanting to see in Newberg? And so like one creative solution is what Heather mentioned there is, and that's easy enough for us to figure out, where all the parks are. You can even do a radius around, figuring out the walking radius to all of these things. And so, we'll just put that in as part of our analysis, right? Does that mean that, like some of the other things you'll mention, traffic and parking obviously will be a part of the discussion as well. We already require, I think, I don't remember what the parking ratios are, but, we'll look into that as well. But in terms of aesthetics of buildings, we can create clear and objective design standards. So there's things that we can, it's not like the clear and objective standards means that we're just going to allow multifamily housings to come in that's not meeting the goals of the city, right? Clear and objective standards are going to be vetted so that they meet the goals of the city, but they're making it so that somebody that wants to build multifamily in Newberg has a more simple pathway to still meet those goals that we have for the city, right? They're just more numerical form, quite frankly. So it's not like because we're being told to have clear and objective standards, this means that we're going to have buildings that don't meet the needs of the community, right? It's just a different type of code language in the code of how we can get buildings that meet the needs of the community, right? It's just,
Sure.
It's semantics a little bit. It's going to be this fluffy kind of, nobody really knows what it means sort of language, but that's fine. There's pathways for people to go that way, but then also the clear and objective standards are going to be a lot more clear but are going to meet the needs for the community. So,
Can I add something here?
yeah.
So going off with, I believe Linda just said a minute ago about architectural standards. So the thing with that is essentially money. So why it doesn't happen is because it costs more money to do it than to not do it. And so especially if you're talking multifamily, you know, so let's be honest, low cost housing, the developer isn't going to spend the money. And so again, we're into, in my opinion, like I said before, a contradictory goal. However, I think you can incentivize something like that by offering developers the opportunity to defray the cost of extra architecture in the name of beautification and have their project you know, approved that way. In other words, okay, so I'm spending an extra, I don't know, 200 grand on making this look nice, and you know, the city will, you know, cover a percentage of that cost to as a benefit to the community. Because I absolutely agree with Linda that bad architecture affects everybody. So not to be a little bit of a rant, but if you put up an ugly building in the middle of town, everybody's got to look at that and be affected by that, and their mood sucks because of that, because, you know, for the life of that building. And you know, it's not something you can just tear down again, because it's, you're representing a significant investment, you know, and then you got to put something else up, and hopefully that's better. You know, there's no guarantee of that. And so when you have something that's approved that's just ugly and that's just get put up, I mean, it just affects everything, and you don't realize it, but it's like this oppression that kind of sits on everything. And so to fix that is a very worthy goal, in my opinion, and worth whatever we would, whatever cost it would go to the city. I mean, you know, within reason.
Yeah, design standards are a tricky situation. And you're totally right. It's kind of this, you know, sometimes the more design standards you ask, it increases the cost of a building, that
Well,
sort
again,
of thing,
I'm
right?
not
But there's
talking about
some
approaching
give and
design
take we can do,
perspective.
you know?
I'm not talking about approaching it from a design standards perspective. I'm talking about approaching
Oh, I
it from
see.
a incentive approach. In other words, you
Right.
don't say, okay, these are our standards, you know, meet them, you know, because then you have sameness. Okay, and everybody's going to meet the particular standard being. What you want is to incentivize the developer spending more money on architecture towards beautification. And, you know, word it in such a way that and, you know, you got to figure out your incentive rates and that sort of thing. You've got to make it attractive for people to build something, or it doesn't get built.
Or maybe they go someplace else and build their shit. Excuse my language. And maybe that we have design standards in Newberg that makes it a more beautiful place to live. And people that want to come and build something quality, then that's what we do, instead of saying, oh, we got to lower our standards so that we can build as much as we can build and get as many people in here as we can. And that is, to me, a conflict of interest.
Well, that's raising costs again. And if we want affordable housing at some point, well, reasonably priced housing, we don't want to raise the costs for just no reason, essentially. Tell people to pack up and go and develop somewhere else.
I'm sure that I'm not meaning that.
I think if I can add to this part of the discussion too, you know, I think Connor brings up a good point that you want to make sure that there are different price points of the houses. And then I think Jason brought up the good point that every time you add design, you add costs. And so cities aren't always able to afford to finance those changes, but things you could incentivize with are things like density, height. Sometimes you can give more units in exchange for then getting a better design. So those are other ways that you can use the code rather than finances of the city to get a better design product.
That's exactly. That's a very good point. That's a good way to do it.
Right.
And Sharon, I'm agreeing with you. I think I'm just talking method here, not.
No, I know. I come from the other standpoint. And so, yeah, right. I see that. but there
Yeah,
has to be
just-
a way of saying, we want this type of city.
And can
Sure.
I just ask, again, I've only just joined this commission, so I know very little, but I'm wondering if there are any codes around landscaping.
Oh,
Many.
yes.
Many.
It's usually sometimes they'll require 15% of the total land has to be landscape, something like that. So yes, landscape is definitely part of the code requirements.
And
Yeah.
I wonder if maybe that should also be reviewed just to make sure that it still meets the requirements that we would like to have within the city. And I have to apologize. I've got a little bit of a family emergency going on, so I need to leave, even though I would love to give some more thoughts to this. So I really
Glad you're
We'll
able to
have more
join.
in-depth conversations in more
And-
meetings too. So.
And we will definitely look at landscaping standards. We'll look at all adjacent standards, not just the multifamily design standards. Make sure we get the full picture.
that sounds fabulous. Thanks.
Great. Yes, so this is a really great conversation. Are there any other things? I kind of just put some questions here to kind of help guide, facilitate, but I think we're already going through some really great ones. But any other sort of, are there areas that you hope to see in terms of new multifamily developments in Newberg? Areas that we should be thinking about when we're looking at the code and making any sort of changes?
Can I ask you something,
Yes.
Barry? So when you imagine multifamily housing, so we're generally looking at smaller stuff, higher density, and lower costs. I mean, because that's the idea, right? And so who does you imagine, or who do you envision living in those types of units as a planner? Like
Well,
how old are they? What do they do? That kind of thing.
well,
Wait, do you have that in your H&A? Often the H&A has that exact information.
it might. And I can look into that for sure. Kind of like who are the people that are living in already multifamily in general.
Right.
In the city of Newberg, we may have that data for you.
Like well, and I'm not saying hey, give me the data. I'm not saying that. I'm just wondering if maybe your assumptions are correct as far as what it is you're going for. Like Sharon's talking about, or Linda was talking about, they wanted for the kids, so young families. And the thing is a lot of people, young people, so I'm thinking people under 30 aren't really having families at that age. They're having families like 28 to 35, and that's not how things were years ago, but that's kind of how things are now. And so people that are under 28 or 30 or so, they still need a place to live. They're the people that, they're starting out in the workforce. They need something essentially cheap and it's just for themselves. And, they need to be able to work, and so they're not looking to have space for more than themselves necessarily, and I'm not saying, pack them in like sardines, but I'm saying, maybe we need to look at something differently because of that's just how people are now. So if you're looking at, say, okay, our starter homes are for the young married couple at 23 with one kid, and those people don't exist, you're building something for somebody that doesn't exist, and that's never a good thing. And so you kind of see my point.
Yeah. No, I think it's good to kind of understand the context of kind of how, things are going on today. I would argue there's so many different types of people that need smaller housing. So
Sure.
like, here's the other thing too. It's like, because multifamily is 5 or plus units, I think we automatically assume it's going to be these like 20+ unit giant apartment complexes, but it could also be as small as, a building with literally 5 dwelling units in it, right? So So we kind of have to create code that's going to be able to address all of those things, which are obviously two totally different sized buildings and things that are happening there. But in general, it's, multifamily is going to be for people that want to live in smaller spaces, people that can only afford to live in smaller spaces because the rent's going to be less. It's for, seniors because they're downsizing from
Sure.
their single family home to a smaller unit. There's so many different things, but I think you're right in that we should, keep in mind who are these types of people that, are going to be using these buildings. The other hard thing too is, these buildings are going to last many, many years, right? And who knows how things shift, but I agree. I think it's good to keep in mind who is going to be using these buildings, and what their needs are going to be, on what the current situation is. Yeah.
Well, so speaking to your one point there about why you don't see, or why you think of 20 and not 5, and that's just economy of scale. It's very hard for a developer to make any money on 5.
True.
Especially that kind of thing. It's either 1 or 2 or maybe 3 or 20. It's really hard to get like 5 to 10 and make any money. And to fit that in too, because like the amount of space is like, okay, we have a new subdivision and we have all this space to build whatever, or we have like, we're going from 7,500 foot lot and we need to put in, more space on that because it got developed, or, we had like a small annex, things like that. And it's that middle bit is there's almost nothing that applies to it. And that's why you just don't see it.
Yeah. And I agree with that. Yeah. I totally agree with that.
Oh, and I was going to ask one more thing is, in some of these discussions, we should bring in a developer or two to ask them, say, what is in your way to building more stuff? And if it's just cost, okay, there's nothing you can do about that. I mean, price of steel, price of concrete, whatever. But if there's some bit of regulation that's really in their craw or some obstacle, then we could take a real hard look at that to really help things along.
Yeah. Yeah. And we do plan on having interviews and focus groups with developers, especially in the code amendment process, so that they can really kind of see, just because I'm not a developer, right? So if I put something in there and they automatically go, oh no, that's going to add, this amount of hardship for us, then we have to take that information and be like, okay, well, is that something that, we as Newberg are, okay with or not? It doesn't mean that if the developer tells us, like, this is going to make things really hard in Newberg, that we have to change everything to meet their needs. But at the same time, we do have these goals of wanting to make sure we're having enough housing for everyone at all incomes, right? So we'll have to balance that as well.
It's just one of those things. It's like you can't think of it like you're meeting the needs of the developer, because the developer builds the best he can at the best cost he can, and then charges, pretty much a set percentage on top of that. So whatever it is you're doing to them, you're not really costing the developer, you're costing whoever's going to live there later.
Yeah.
And that's how you have to look at it.
Yeah. 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 But we'll definitely be having conversations with them about this as well. Yeah. Yeah. These are all really good points. And I know Heather's taking notes.
Yes, I am.
Sorry, I don't dominate the conversation. Other people, feel free to jump in.
Yeah. Any other things that we can think of that you're aware of, that you want, you've been hearing from people in the community, that we haven't already talked about? I mean, I think we've hit all of the major, hard hitters that we usually hear when we talk about multifamily. Is there anything, Heather, that maybe, based on all of the projects you've been doing, just something that you're interested in hearing more about from them?
I mean, you guys really hit the highlights. I really do appreciate the perspective of, let's hear from the developers too. We've got that built into the schedule. So yeah, no, I don't think there's anything specific that I was hoping to get that I haven't heard a discussion of.
Can I throw one thing out? And it's more something I'd like to see, maybe statewide, citywide, or anything. But can we look at least at the sorry.
No, we can't.
I'll mute and come back here.
Somebody didn't like your point.
Oh my God.
Once I get to my mute. There we go.
That must have been a really bad point.
Yeah, could happen to any of
I
us.
think that's a valid point you have.
They really liked it. Okay. Any other things before we hear back from Jeff? Things that, I think I heard something about pedestrian environment. Some of that is things that we can do around walkways that can be added. And, I think there are some requirements in our code too already. So we'll be looking at that as well, making sure that, if people
Okay, what
want to
my-
have that as part of like a multifamily development. Yeah.
One of my ideas that I have seen in my travels in wonderful towns is that they often have pedestrian areas where they have shut off the street and the restaurants and things can pull the tables out into the street, and it's more like almost a fair. And I don't know if that's something that could happen in Newberg. I mean, the obvious street would be First Street, but to just give it a little bit more somewhere of a more global feel, something that makes it more special instead of it just being about cars and traffic.
I'd like to see that too, but I think First Street might be problematic since it's
Well,
it's
I thought that
state
they could
thoroughfare,
just take
but
the cars that are coming in by the Dairy Queen and take them up one more street to Second. Or
better
no,
off
the other
you're better
way.
off doing all on Second Street or what is that, North Sherman than
Back-
First Street.
Well, I mean, back
Yeah.
behind Knapp's Thriftway, whatever that street is, just wrap it around that. Because it already is
Better
a
off
kind of
closing
a
it off
through
for your
street.
fair than you are trying to close off First Street and redirecting traffic. It's easier to keep traffic and put the closed off stuff away from it.
Yeah, it's a little bit beyond the scope of this project, but it's definitely
Yeah.
something that,
Yeah.
in terms of creating, pedestrian spaces, that's always, something nice.
We've been talking about that sort of thing in, city development for, I don't know, at least 10 years. And the main holdback, because the good place to put it is Second Street and Third Street, but the main holdback is the residential areas there. If there was more commercial areas, another block south,
yeah.
they'd be able to do that. But I mean, that's just an ongoing thing. And I think where that stuff's going to end up going is, as you mentioned earlier, the riverfront area. That's going to be a very easy place to make it
Right,
just like you're saying.
right.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, I'm back with mine really quick. I apologize. The guy, I think he was selling pest killing, and he's just standing and looking at the window at my dog, who's standing in the window looking at him. But what I was going to suggest, and I don't know if it's something we can address, but adding solar as a requirement, at least.
Good. Good
is-
idea.
I did a little research, the California thing, and then I found a place in Massachusetts that was making it work with multifamily as well, with the bigger things like that. So if that's something we can look at including as part of code.
Sure. Yeah,
Yeah, that's a good idea.
it's definitely more of a common one that we hear about now to look into. Especially if maybe there's something like an incentive that we can provide to doing that. Yeah. And same, there's also been discussions too about, incentivizing adding like charging stations for some of the parking stalls. That's also sometimes at the discussion. So we can also look into that as well. Obviously,
definitely
it
on
doesn't
that
mean
as
that's going to
well.
happen, but we can look into
Yeah,
it.
that one wouldn't be too hard if you're, with the new construction, that would be a pretty easy add-on, I would think, with some charging stations.
Yeah, so some cities have looked at that. The previous city that I worked for before was thinking about that for multifamily, not maybe quite as a requirement, but somehow trying to incentivize that for new developments. But it's something to think about if we're on the sustainability equipment realm.
What do they do like with multifamily? So they've all got maybe a parking spot. Would they have a charger at some of the spots or at each of the garages?
Yeah, there's a couple of different ways. It's either like if it is a garage, it could be either electrical ready. So if somebody wanted to put in like
that's a good
electricity,
idea.
yeah, it would be easier for them to do it from the start, because you're building it in so it's ready for that. Sometimes you would have certain numbers of stalls that would already have charging stations, and so that sort of thing.
Yeah, well, going kind of with what Jason was talking about, if the young single person would be the end user of these multifamily dwelling units, then they're also very much into the electric cars and stuff like that. So something like that in the code might be nice.
Yeah, absolutely. And just a caveat there, it's not just the young people. I've been all electric for 3 years.
Oh, sorry.
but it's yeah, here at my house, I'm able to plug into just the 110, even just an external 110, like a 220 would probably be better for most things. But that seems like it would be an easy thing to add to at least have a accessibility to charging, or like a dedicated carport with chargers or something like that.
Yeah.
It was analog.
Just interjecting as a young, 20-something-year-old who was recently single. Sure, that's all nice and good, but all these additions and stuff that we'd look for, it's just going to add up costs on these buildings, and gets back to the whole issue of, we don't want something that's going to price people out, young people who are looking for this sort of housing. Like myself.
Running an electric wire for a potential charging for an electric car isn't going to run really anything.
The infrastructure could add more cost to the developer, but it's something of like, we could incentivize things like that versus make it a requirement too. So
Exactly.
it's just how we balance all of that.
And something like that is always cheaper initially than as a retro.
Right, exactly.
Yeah. But I think it's good to always keep in mind, we're not wanting to make it so that it's harder for people to build multifamily, but we want to make sure that it's going to meet the needs of the community.
Right. My point is, we're not trying to design our own dream designer apartments. We're designing it, or trying to incentivize something for people who are going to use it.
People who can afford it.
Yeah, but I would counter that electrical is affordable now and only getting more affordable.
And it's the future.
It's that might actually incentivize more people to move in.
I agree.
Yeah. Okay. Anything else we can think of? Let me stop sharing. Actually, don't know what time it is anymore. Oh, perfect. Okay. Like I said, I wasn't expecting it to be a super long meeting. We kind of just wanted to get some initial insights from you all. And this has been a really good discussion. I feel like we have a lot of good inputs on a variety of different things. So that's great.
Okay.
Any other last minute things you all can think of?
Well, we can always contact you if you think of something, right?
Exactly. Yep. Yeah, that's exactly it. You can always email me or call me after the fact. And yeah, oh, the other thing too is, so in terms of kind of the point Connor's making, I'll make a point to have developers that do affordable housing, like subsidized affordable housing, to also be a part of our developer conversation, so that we can ensure that we're not creating barriers for also subsidized affordable housing, not just market rate as well. Because that's a goal for us in the city, is to make sure that we're building, and it's actually in the housing needs analysis, the area that we are lacking the most of is in those subsidized affordable housing units. So those that are making usually 50%, 30% of the median family income or less in the community. So we'll make sure that we're addressing that as well. So I appreciate the insight, Connor, there.
Okay.
Right. And it doesn't look like we have anyone from the public joining. So usually I always like to leave, time for any people in the public if they've joined to comment, but otherwise I think we're good. Our next meeting is going to be in August. I believe it's August 25th, maybe, I think was the date there. Again, I'll be sending you reminders, emails, that sort of thing. And yeah, just feel free to email or contact me, call me if if you have other ideas or things you want to make sure that we don't forget when we do our audit and amendments project. So yeah.
Okay. All right.
Right.
Good night, everybody.
Good
Thank
night.
you.
Everyone have a good evening.
You too.
Have a good evening.